Let's get some more perspective this evening from someone else who used to head up Canada's spy agency. With me right now, former CSIS director Ward Elcock. Hi, Mr. Elcock. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
I appreciate you making the time, as always. We spoke a few weeks ago, and at the time, sort of at the outset of this reporting on what happened to Michael Chong, or the Globe's reporting on the CSIS intelligence. And I had asked you whether there's a certain bar that CSIS has in mind if they, through which they decide or against which they decide to convey information. Based on what you've heard in the weeks since, do you think ultimately the right decisions were made?
In terms of what the service does, the service has a limit in terms of what it can transmit to anybody. It is there as an advisor to government. It's not there as to inform us or to inform parliamentarians about national security issues. It's there to provide information to the government of Canada. That's the statute. There is a limit to what it can say. And not just because of security, just because it's limited in what it's allowed to talk about. So the service can make, within the limits of the law, the service can make some decisions about how much information it will provide to people. And in this case, it apparently did go and talk to the member of parliament, and apparently, while they didn't provide him information about the potential threat, which actually doesn't seem to be much of a threat, despite all of the political back and throwing, toing and throwing. The reality is they did try and communicate that some sense of risk to him and how to cope with the potential for foreign interference, as I understand it. That's not perhaps enough in the circumstances, but they did provide some information.
Yeah, I think what they're calling, I'll just parse apart if you don't mind your answer, they're calling it a defensive briefing, and they've given it to a number of MPs.
Yes.
Mr. Chong's response to that was, you know, he was given general information essentially about how to arm himself against threats, but wasn't informed specifically about the threat. And now there's this directive that's being issued, like no matter what, you have to let the MP know. Do you think that is a good move?
It may be an inevitable result of the circumstances. It is a risky move in some sense, although the direction to provide information is couched in pretty restrictive language, in the sense that if it's going to disclose sources and methods, if it's going to disclose secret information that can't be disclosed to people like even an MP, then you've got to find a way to provide something, but you're not going to be providing everything. So they clearly haven't decided to provide all of the information to Mr. Chong or anybody else.
So you said also a few seconds ago that you thought that the politics around it had sort of exacerbated, I'm paraphrasing, but it exacerbated what the actual threat was. Why do you have that impression?
I think this is because the reality of our system, the way it works, political parties in opposition almost invariably treat national security issues as a way to beat the government up, rather than treating them as national security issues. And Mr. Chong has been no different. This has been political grandstanding at a fairly high order, and unfortunately he's been given a platform to do it on.
So help me understand that, because I think from I've interviewed Mr. Chong a number of times. I've been one of the people giving him that platform because he is the person being reported on as, you know, quote unquote targeted by the Chinese regime, so much so that the diplomat was expelled as a result. How is it grandstanding if you find out that you and your family are targeted and decide to raise some concerns about that?
As I understand it, what we're talking about when we talk about targeting, this isn't an assassination attempt or a physical threat to anybody. This was a request that a Chinese agent of some kind, I'm not sure what organization he worked for, was asked to collect information about Mr. Chong's relatives in China, his family in China. The reality is, one place to get that information is in Canada. The other place they're going to get it ultimately is in China. The reality, Mr. Chong has relatives in China, and as long as he has relatives in China, even if he doesn't talk to them, they're exposed, and things he does will affect them, and they will ultimately, inevitably be targeted.
And so does that make it something, though, that we shouldn't, I mean, I get where you're coming from. You know a lot more about this stuff than the average Canadian like myself does. But I think a lot of Canadians, when they read that or heard that, even though it's not an assassination attempt, are sort of thinking, oh, that can happen to an MP. That's the kind of actions that are taking place. do you understand why there would be some sort of reaction or even desire to see a little bit more information about it?
The reality is everybody always has a desire to see more information about national security issues. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, people always have a desire to see it. In my book, you want to provide as much information as you can, but the reality is there are equities that you have to protect. In terms of whether it's wrong or right, it's clearly unfortunate, but the reality is if you have relatives still in China, and Hong Kong, while it may have looked at one point different from the rest of China, is now just like the rest of China. If you have relatives in China, those relatives are exposed if you do something in some other country. If you speak out against China, the Chinese will take, they have in the past, they will in the future, and they'll continue to do so. And frankly, there is little we can do about it short of bringing all of those people to Canada.
But should we just accept it as a society? I mean, I think
I'm not saying we should. Yeah. I'm not saying we should accept it, and I think that declaring Mr. Zhao persona non grata was clearly the right thing to do in the circumstances, and it does send a message to China. But the reality is, beyond that, there's not a whole lot we can do to protect Mr. Chong or anybody else's relatives in China. And Mr. Chong is not the only person, and some people actually probably face greater threats than Mr. Chong. And while I think MPs are important, if you do this for MPs, frankly, it's pretty hard not to say we should be doing it for other people in the same situation or worse than Mr. Chong.
Right, and certainly we've heard that from various members of the intelligence apparatus as well, right? There's lots of different people who speak out against what's happening in China who are targeted in a similar way in this country. Just before I let you go, I have a few seconds. You've consistently said that you didn't think a public inquiry was the right venue to explore the issue of foreign interference. We're going to find out next week if, in fact, there is one. Do you still think it's the wrong avenue?
I still think it's not a useful venue to explore the issue of foreign interference. I don't think in the end there will be much that the Canadians will actually learn from a public inquiry. A lot of it will unfortunately have to remain top secret, and ultimately will not be, the hearings won't be open to the public. So I'm not sure what a public inquiry actually will achieve. And frankly, I'm not sure that there are many people who could run such a public inquiry and actually give you a useful answer, because most people who will run such a public inquiry, given the paucity of people who wouldn't have any national security experience in this country, frankly, it's going to be such a learning experience. I don't know that the result is going to be terribly useful. And frankly, a lot of royal commissions cost a lot of money and take a lot of time for not very much. Not saying that all royal commissions are by definition unuseful. Mr. Justice Rouleau's commission was a very good example of a positive commission. But there are a lot of commissions where we waste a lot of money and waste a lot of time getting to an answer that really isn't very helpful.
We'll find out Tuesday, I guess. Mr. Elcock, yes. Thank you for your insights and your analysis, as always. Appreciate it. Ward Elcock is a former